So we have a lot of materials we need to talk about. The first couple chapters, one of the biggest issues is vocabulary. Making sure that we are all talking about the same thing, make sure that we have the same definitions, and make sure we all have the same ideas about what we're going to talk about. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about what a lifestyle of a project is. We're going to talk about what the attributes, what a project is. So there's some formal definitions of a project we need to look at. Why do we want to schedule our projects? Why do we want to use any of these techniques? What about the PMI? So there's a group called the Project Management Institute. Why is it important and maybe important in our futures? What is a stakeholder? So we're going to have a lot of pieces in the first of this chapter. So project attributes. So this will be a final question, and it's where we start the chapter. What is a project? What is a project? So there's a lot of different kinds of projects. There are projects in software, projects in businesses, projects at the college, projects in construction. Here's what they all have in common. They have a clear objective. We know that at the end of that project, we are going to accomplish something. So a couple of years ago, we used the project of turning this intersection here into a nice curve and a new parking lot. Some of you were here before they had that. Does anybody remember that? A couple of you from town. It was a stop sign. You had to go straight uphill, stop, turn. And so this was about a $2 million project to build a little road and to do some flowers and some plantings and redo the parking lot a little bit. It had a clear objective. It was going to make the road into a curve. It was going to provide parking. That was where its end point was. So it had a designated stopping point and said, here we go. We're going to do this, exactly this. When they redid this building about 5 years ago, they had a designated end point. We're going to do these specific tasks. We're going to replace the air conditioning heating systems. We're going to update and paint some of the rooms. We're going to put in some new pieces. We're going to redo the roof so it doesn't leak every time it rains. Those were those clear objectives. You guys have projects all the time. So think about, you guys have a project, a research paper already to do. It's got clear objectives. It says, I have to write a 5-page paper. It's got specifics to it. I know what I need to do. It really, though, is a series of activities, usually interdependent. So here's something that isn't really a project, but I like to use it as talking about those interdependent activities. How many of you have taken a shower in the last week? All right, just checking. Because if you haven't, I really don't want you raising your arm, all right? When you take a shower, is it a set of specific activities? Yeah. You go to the shower, you take off your clothes, you turn on the water. And some of you may be different. You may turn on the water half an hour before, then wander down to the bathroom. Whatever those set of steps are. But they're interdependent. In other words, they depend on each other. So if you forget a step and you climb into the shower with your clothes on, does that work very well? No. And if I forget the towel off and I try to put on my clothes at the end, doesn't work well. And if I take a shower and I put on the same dirty clothes that I had on before, again, doesn't work well. So they're interdependent. In other words, each activity tends to have something it's dependent upon. In this case, it's a series of events that we all have to carry out. I have a 9-year-old. Those independent events, I have to tell her, clean underwear, not the dirty underwear you wore before, because you're 9 and you don't quite get this yet, apparently, or you're just stubborn and a pain in my butt. Those activities interrelate. Think about building a curve around the corner or building a building. You're not going to paint first, right? You have to do those in a specific order. So there is a specific time frame. And that when we say time frame, what I'm saying is when it's going to be done. So generally we have a project and we say, all right, we're going to be done by this specific date. We've set a time frame. At Peru State College, we are known for setting dates and not getting them done. We are kind of dependent down here on contractors, and they are hard to get, and they know we're dependent down here. It's hard to get people to bid, and so usually every project we have done has been delayed. The The latest was the activity center or the arts center, and it was delayed almost, a year? Close to? Yeah, it was a while. Our road out here delayed. The boys' men's dormitory down there, Dalzell, it was delayed. It did not get done as quickly as what we intended it to. So we have some issues with that. We also tend to have a lot of resources. So what's a resource in a project? So I'm going to redo this building, and we're going to do it right this time. What might be a resource? Wood, drywall, so building supplies. What's probably the most common? Oh, pipe might be. When I make this motion, what do you think of? Money. Is money a resource? Do we ever have enough of it? No. No, we don't. So all different kinds of resources. We have a time frame, so we can also think of time as a resource. People are resources. Generally, do we ever have enough people on a project? No. We're always not enough people. Here's what really sets a project differently than what we're going to call an ongoing activity. It's unique. It's a one-time endeavor. We are only going to remodel this building, and when we do it, it's going to be unique. There is nothing in this remodel that is the same as if we did another building. When we remodeled Gendra a couple years ago, it is unique. They found all kinds of unique things in there. They're unique. When I build a highway, and you see the orange cones and you curse because they're redoing the highway again, that construction there, that project is unique. So that's one of the attributes we have to be aware of, is they're unique. They're a one-time endeavor. Now, can we have projects that are similar? Yes, but they are unique. A sponsor. We tend to also have a sponsor or a customer, because projects can be inside, outside, external, internal. So there's a lot of pieces that we need to deal with in there. So the biggest thing we're always going to run into is this idea of budget and resources. No project ever has unlimited funding. Even federal government programs have some limits to their funding. The FBI wanted to update their computer system a few years ago. FBI's got some big dollars, right? They pulled the plug eventually when they hit about the $500 million mark and scrapped the project. Oops. So budgeting is important. Peru doesn't have that kind of budgeting. So we know we have resources. We know we have budgets. That schedule becomes important. And as we go through, the most important one might be that idea of stakeholders. Those stakeholders are those people that have an interest in the project. So if I'm remodeling Dalzell, are students a stakeholder? Yeah. What about faculty? What about the administration? What about the taxpayers? Yeah, all of those are stakeholders. We have to deal with quality, and we're going to try to define quality. Thank you, Watch. We're going to talk about quality. We're going to talk about the scope, what that means. Customer satisfaction. So can I have a high-quality product or a project that gets done and still have low customer satisfaction? Can we do it the other way? You don't want to sing the Baby Duck song, do you? So we have to look at all these factors, and then we have this idea of risk. How many of you have taken risk management already? Oh, not yet, but a couple. So we've devoted at least one class, and you can actually get a degree in risk management. And so we're going to introduce you to some risk management strategies. And so Dawn's going to teach us about those when we get to them. No, she's not. All right. So what does a project manager do? I am going to tell you that the number one ingredient that a project manager can do is has communication skills and the ability to work within those skills. So they can communicate with the stakeholders. They can communicate with the people on the project. They can communicate with their own employers. So things they have to do: prevent issues, try to anticipate what's going on, overcome changes. Every project is going to have a change of some sort. So when they built this building and redid it, what some of you don't remember is where this is all bumped out here and over behind in the corner there, that was a flat wall. So it actually went back in right here, and they moved this out, and that's where some of the air handling equipment is for these rooms. When they took this ceiling down to look at it, what they discovered was this building was about to collapse right along here. So if you actually open up some ceiling tiles in here, you'll see they had to put steel beams in there to keep the floor above it from collapsing. Oops. You know, those accidental collapses. So it was a good thing they were in there and they did that. That's that idea of overcoming what's happening. There's always going to be challenges and changes in a project. So if that project manager just said, well, let's just cover that up, is that a responsible project manager? No. Does it happen a lot? Unfortunately, we see the issues of those all the time. So we also need to talk about the life cycle of a project. So typically we look at here on a project, and this is kind of that amount of effort going into it. So at the beginning, we're not sure about this project. We don't have a lot of interest and a lot of work in it. And as we get closer, so we start building what's called a project charter that we're gonna actually build one, and you're gonna see what that charter looks like, and it's got a lot of details and outlines what we're doing, how we're doing it, who we're doing it with, and we start getting those details. Now we're starting to get more and more people involved. So we've got the charter that says, hey, we're going to do this project. We've got a plan then developed, so now we're getting a little more. And as that project builds, it kind of reaches a point where we have, all of a sudden we've got 100 workers in this building. They're almost done, and they start pulling workers out because it starts to tower down a little bit. You don't have as much stuff going on. And then finally at the end you have, all right, here's where we're going to accept it. So we say, yep, you guys have built this room exactly the way we wanted it. And then at the very last stage is this idea of paperwork deliverables. You know, I used to laugh and I didn't really understand it. But my grandfather worked in the oil field and he managed an oil field company. And in the building they had, it was a pretty cool building, had all this stuff and offices and, you know, shower rooms and all this stuff. And in his office on his desk was a roll of toilet paper in a wooden holder, and it said, no project is done until the paperwork is finished. And I always thought that was funny. And then I did some project management, and I started to understand, hey, that's not really funny. What it really is all those archived documents, all the things about what we've done are possibly the most valuable commodity we have, both for the person building this project and the person that is taking it into account. So part of that for us here is we've got as-built documents of this is how the building was now recreated. Here's what we found. Now we have a little better idea about this building. There aren't really good blueprints to some of these buildings built in the 1700s, whatever they were, 1920s, whatever. Some of this was built kind of, hey, let's build a wall here. From the vendor or the contractor's standpoint, those documents are invaluable. And what it does is it tells us how much resources we had to spend on this project, how many people we had to bring in, how many contractors, how did we do things. Because when they go out to bid the next project, they can use that information. Now remember, projects are unique, but here if they said, oh, we had to do 1,000 square feet of drywall, and it took 4 drywallers and took them 3 days, that's information we use in the future so we can bid better. Because our hope is, if we're bidding a project or we're doing a project, do we want to make money on it? We do. We really do. On the other side, do we want to do it as cheaply as possible for the person hiring it out? So we're going to look kind of at both sides. So this class, we look at a lot of different lenses we strap on. And we say, this is what's happening in this area. This is why it's happening. Well, we want our vendor, we want our builder to make money on our project. Does that seem weird that we'd want somebody we hire to make money? Do we need to hire them again? Possibly. Do we want them to do quality work? Because if they run out of money because they've underbid a project, is that last project pieces they're doing going to be quality? No. So we need to think about that in terms of that overall thing. So the initiating phase. So this is where we say, you know what, we've got a problem of some sort. Air conditioning systems in this building did not work very well at all, and that was kind of the driver for this one. So I remember when I was a college student here a billion years ago, up in the corner rooms, it would literally be 50 degrees. Some of you may have had Dr. Grotrian, Dr. Sherry Grotrian's mom in class. Did any of you have Dr. G? We would get in there, and it was about 50 degrees in this room, and we're shivering, and she would say, that's okay. Cold temperatures keep you awake so you can study and sing songs about accounting and such. But it really didn't work. We know that it didn't work. The roof leaked. This place was pretty sad, and if you were leading tours over on this building, this is where almost all the classes are. About 80% of the classes are taught in this building, and it really was pretty sad. So they had a need. They said, all right, here's a need. We also maybe, if you're doing some kind of joint venture, it may be an opportunity. Maybe we're going to build a new software app, and we're going to make $1 million a week. So it doesn't have to be a need. It can be a problem. It can be an opportunity. So we come in and we say, all right, we know that we have a need. Let's develop a rationale. And so that's where we start to have that objective of, okay, we're going to redo these classrooms. The rationale is we have a lot of students that need them, faculty that need this done. We need a decent place for students to learn. If we're going to keep attracting students, they need some place where the ceiling's not falling down on their head. We also look at those expected benefits. So what is the benefit to that? Well, when we lead tours on campus, if you used to be one of them that had to lead a tour on the old Dalzell, I don't know how many of you have seen the old Dalzell before they redid it. It had literally not changed since about 1937. So one of my benefits of remodeling is I attract more students. If you see a classroom from 1937 with an old chalkboard still on it, as a college student, does that make you think, man, this is where I want to go to school? Some of you it might. But that's that benefits. We also hoped redoing the HVAC system would lower costs. It's expensive to heat and cool a building this size. So hopefully we've changed that a little bit. So then we look at some of the general requirements. So we know we have a limited time to remodel, so that could be part of the conditions. And in fact, those of you that lived through this, we were remodeling this building while we were trying to work in it. So they would do a floor at a time, essentially. So I moved the computer lab out, moved the computer lab back down, and we worked around as best we could the construction. And it was kind of painful sometimes. Sometimes you'd be in class, and really all you'd hear all day long is, and they're hammering away next door. It's very distracting. But students could see the end point, I hope. I hope they could see the end point. And so we had some conditions. This is also a historical building. So there's some conditions that made it a little harder to change. Quite honestly, it would be cheaper to tear this building down and build a brand new steel building this size than it is to remodel this one to this stage. But with the state, we could get money from actually its cigarette taxes. We could get money from that to rebuild, but not build new. So there's a whole lot of conditions on there. It was a very tight budget, so there were conditions of we're going to hire outside contractors for some things. Some things like the carpet squares, we're going to hire our own janitorial staff. We're going to come in and put them in, or maintenance staff. And I will say sometimes that worked really well. If you go in my office, you can see that the guys putting the carpet tiles in there, that wasn't their main job. Did they try really hard? Yeah, but it's not their competency, which is sometimes why you hire an outside contractor. So computer services. Normally they would hire in all the electrical wiring and all of the IT wiring and everything. Computer services came over and did a lot of the work when they could on the IT stuff. And again, your guys are really good, but is that their forte? They don't do that all day, every day. They don't necessarily always have the right equipment. So again, it was part of that, how do we save money? And so there's some really strange tales about things that went wrong in here. So they had to take off all the thermostats, and they had to take off all the control equipment that you see up on the wall there. Well, those thermostats, some of you I know, I've seen you in network classes and other things, they're assigned an address, an IP address. So that one says, hey, I'm in 202. They pulled them all apart, yanked them out, and threw them in a bucket. Didn't tell them where they were and what they had to then go do once this was done, because that thermostat may have ended up in another room. So you're trying to figure out, hey, this room's really cold. I keep running the thermostat up and it doesn't change it. So there was a lot of things that went weirdly wrong in that project, and you're going to see those that happen quite a bit. So that second phase then, that second phase says, all right, we know that we've got that charter. Now, hopefully we've got a sponsor in our company. We've got a sponsor in the governor in this case or something, and said, all right, now we're going to develop a much tighter plan. Our general objective said, hey, we're going to rebuild this building. We know that some of those conditions. So now we're getting a plan, and we're starting to work on individual activities. So what activities, what sequence, what resources we need, who's going to do what, how long is it going to take exactly, and even more importantly, we estimated our budget for the charter. We hopefully can pin that budget down a little tighter at this point. And we also now start looking at risk management. So the risk in here, what are we going to do if this building is uninhabitable? Where are we going to find enough rooms to put classes in? We don't have them on campus. There are a lot of places we are resource limited. We don't have enough classrooms, and we're rediscovering that right now because of COVID. COVID said, well, we have to cut our room sizes down in number of people. We found out we don't have a lot of extra rooms, and especially large rooms that we can spread people out in. And so we're struggling. In fact, in some of these classes, and this is not the ideal way to teach a class, I've got students in this classroom and I've got ones across the wall over here. And so we're trying to mirror the lecture across there. And so I have to keep walking back and forth. And so my first day here, I did 15,000 steps while I'm sitting here at work. And I'm like, holy cow. No wonder I'm tired when I got home. It's good exercise, but not the way I want to get it. So our planning phase starts putting in all those details together. This one's pretty hard to understand. What do you think we do in a performing phase? We perform. We do the work. So this is where we actually set all those objectives, and we actually say, all right, so the project manager comes in, we work on the project, we get it done. So part of what they're doing is monitoring how the project is progressing, both monetarily and in terms of tasks and milestones. If something goes wrong or we need to make changes, they have to be able to take corrective action. In a lot of cases, when you have a project, you're going to see the term called change order. In other words, I recommend a change as that project manager. I have to get changes approved. And so something like having to put in steel beams in here, that's a change. It's going to cost money in most cases. You can actually have a change order the other direction where you're going to save money, but I'm going to say it's 99, it's going to cost more money, 1% it's going to be less money. And you have to do things in the right order. So that's other parts of that project monitor is you're trying to make sure that things go in the right order. So many years ago in the city of Falls City, there's a new hospital that was built in 2009. I guess it's not new now, it's about 10 or 11 years old. There's a hospital there, and I was actually the IT director and did some other work for him because I'd done some projects while I'm teaching here, so I was a little crazy. And one of the things that the project manager for a company called Samson Construction did when he got mad was he said, all right, we got the walls up, and I'm going to bring in the company that does the ceiling tiles, and I'm going to put in all the ceiling tiles and the grid work. IT had not been in there. Electrical had not been in there. Piping had not been in there. And so now, because of a miscommunication and the way he decided to do things, all of these vendors putting in gas piping, putting in natural gas, HVAC, IT, electrical, all of those things had to work around these ceiling grids. And because they decided to put the pads in, not only was it the ceiling grids, they had to move tiles out of the way, damaged hundreds of those, spent probably 1,000+ hours of extra work because the project manager for the vendor got in a snit. So those kinds of things. And the problem that was there was typically what I would say for a large project like that. It was about $26 million. is the hospital should have hired their own project manager to oversee the construction company. They said, we're going to save money. We're not going to spend a couple $100,000 on hiring a project management company. We're going to do it ourselves with our environmental supervisor. And as it turns out, that was not a great idea for a lot of reasons. Even better, after the hospital was built, not too long after that, it was discovered that the supervisor that they had in that position was really just stealing all the supplies and building his own house. Great. So, putting that project manager, they would have saved far more than the couple $100,000 they had invested to have put in their own project manager. So, that's that corrective action. So, taking those things and dealing with them as they need. Manage and control changes. Now, here's where something's a little weird. Even as a project manager, you get this title, you're a project manager. Most of the time you can say, I'd like a change, but it actually goes to, in most cases, a change control committee or a group of other people. Why would we do that? Why would you just not get to make changes willy-nilly as a project manager? You do have to make sure everybody knows. It's really more an issue of there is a ripple effect. And in terms of cost, it also means you're not responsible for that cost overrun as a project manager. It's went outside of you. So as a project manager, I love this. Yes, it takes some time, but it also takes that onus off of me that the project isn't $1 million over budget because of something I did. I pointed out and I led them to the right area, but it also takes some additional responsibility. And then at the end, you're going to get customer satisfaction. So you're going to present the building, you're going to present the software project, and so you need to make sure that it meets those acceptance deliverables. So that closing of a project, and we're going to talk a lot about it when we get to that area, that closing is really an interesting time because that's kind of when we finish out all those things and we get the deliverables. In a lot of cases, so had the hospital at Falls City hired a project management company to send down somebody, that's when they would have been switched out. Because they would have brought in a closing project manager who is specific to those duties at the end. So we find out if the project manager, if you want to think about it, had hidden anything or there was any other things, they're used to the paperwork, they're used to those end closings. So a lot of times we switch project managers at that end point. As a project manager, it's a little frustrating because you're like, man, I'm almost done with this project and, great, I'm going to get thrown and go start another one. So sometimes we have to look at it that way, but the reality is that allows a second set of eyes into that project. In a lot of cases, those documents and documentation on there are the end. Now, those two project managers will work together and coordinate that, but it's a way we close any loops in the project. And that's that final phase, that closing phase. So part of the reason we bring somebody else in is we want to get paid. And so we want that to be a forceful person who's going to get as much revenue for us as possible. So we get our final payment for it. So we also go out and they recognize staff. They do all those kinds of things. They create a documents learned. What have I learned? We archive out that information. So we know for the next project, we know what were the pain points. What went really well? What was really painful? The project manager for the construction company deciding to set grid up before we'd even had any of our racking or anything. Painful. Should have jumped up and down on that, but there wasn't anybody to do that or understand what was going on with that. So there's a lot of those things that you can learn later on. Even with the architects. So in a project like that, the architects may make mistakes that you just go, holy cow. Now my brother-in-law is an architect, so he's fed me dinner before. It's great profession, but are they perfect? No. One of the ones they did at this hospital, and from the IT perspective, I said, this is a bad idea, is they made the server closet in there only 8 foot by 16 feet long. Well, that sounds like a pretty big room, doesn't it? At this point, the server closet in that has been expanded to about the size of this room because they now have, I think, 290 physical servers in there. It's huge. It stores up a lot of room. We had to do some other strange things because of issues that happened in that project. That was one of them. And I pointed it out early, And the architect said, I've designed these before. I know what I'm doing. Then I pointed out at some point after they'd already built it, which was really idiot, and it wasn't even anything I had supervisory control over or looked at, was they had a door going out of the emergency room that was only a 30-inch door. Well, in a hospital, can you use a 30-inch door with a wheelchair? No. So they had to revise that and redo it. So weird things like that. They decided to put what's called a clear story. So have you been in the hospital out there? You have. So when you walk in, there's all this clear open space above your head when you walk in the door. That was a late change. All the cabling used to go across there. And so they didn't look at that. And some cables we can extend. So the electrical cables you can extend pretty easily. Data cables have a length limit in most cases. And suddenly we were having 500-foot runs of Cat5 cable were specified. It wasn't going to work. We had to change things. So if you go in there and you see it again, there's some round tubes that go through it. We added those to run, and they are packed full of all kinds of cables and equipment and wiring because it was the only way to make things happen. And so we had to reevaluate and change things around. It was that lessons learned in there. We learned, hey, we should do these things. We should bring in somebody to look at those items before we get there. The best one that I tried to argue, inside the 8x16 server closet, which is now expanded, when I went in there, because originally we were going to have some piping to different closets and it went through the floor. Perfect, because there's actually a sub-building and some other stuff. Except I noticed an extra 6-inch PVC pipe sticking up out of the floor in the server closet. Now we're going to set, at that point we were buying about $6 million worth of equipment to set in there alone. I'm looking at this pipe going, what the hell is that? What is it for? And so I got the project manager from Samson, and they said, well, I think that's where the plumbers put the main sewer stack clean out. In the server closet. So you're going to, at some point, that sewer is going to plug up, and they're going to bring in those cleaning machines and try to snake that out, all the while where they're surrounded by millions of dollars worth of equipment. Can't make that up. There were a lot of those little snafus and things you learned along the way. So we'll talk about those. So this process is kind of interesting, I think. So the process starts with, we know what we need to do. We know the objective. At the end of this, we're going to have, and if we look at just this classroom, we're going to have a classroom done. So we have to define a scope. What is the scope of this project? So if I just say, hey, we're going to rebuild a classroom, that's not very detailed, is it? No. So we need very technical specifications. Aha, we're going to re-sheetrock the room. We're going to put new ceiling tiles in. We're going to put new light fixtures. By doing that, we're going to have to bring in new electrical lines, and we're going to have to plan this room out that way. So maybe we have a circuit for each one of these tables, ideally. We have network cables, locations for each building, each location. We know that we have a data closet in the back, and it should probably be on its own power supply. All those little details, specifications. That is that objective. We start putting in a lot of details. That scope, what is the exact scope of our project? If we don't have it narrowed down very tightly, it's easy for us to do what's called scope creep. In other words, we start expanding what's going to happen in there. When we expand that, that leads to change orders and also cost overruns. So we want to narrow down those as accurately as possible. Does it always work? No, but it gives us a way to start doing that. And then we have to start creating something called a work breakdown structure. Work breakdown structure. You guys have all done this. You just don't realize what you're doing. So a work breakdown structure says I'm going to assign into tasks that I know the length of, I'm going to assign resources and assign it to a task. So all of us have written a 5-page paper in here, right? So there are tasks for that. First task, I got to get the coffee pot maker going. That's a task in there, or a work breakdown structure, a little piece. We know that I need to get the computer turned on, and I need to close out Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all those. And I can break that down so I have 15 minutes for research, 25 minutes for Netflix, 15 minutes for a little more research, 45 minutes to write the paper, another 15 minutes to proofread it, and I break those down into tasks that I understand. When I do that, I can start building a chart of how long those activities are going to take. I can sequence them because we know things have to occur in a specific order. I can tell what I need to use for activities and how long they're going to take. And I can create a project schedule. I also can estimate what those costs are. So if I break it down to, we're going to put 12 sheets of drywall in here, do I know how much it costs for somebody to hang one sheet of drywall and a time? Yeah, so 30 minutes cost me $25. We can estimate those costs. That gives us a way to estimate that entire budget. So this is what we think of as a work breakdown structure. We start from a big item and we start breaking it down into activities. So here we have some kind of a festival. We know we're going to break it down into promotion, volunteers, games, rides, entertainment, food, services. Nobody's going to be doing one of these recently, but these are the kinds of things we would break it down into. So big categories. Then we break it down at least into probably a level 2. So here we've assigned a number. So notice they follow down. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. These numbers are all unique. So we can assign a task, and we also can assign a person. So Pat's going to do the amusement contractor. Down here, we can bring it down even further. So you could bring a 3rd level or a 4th level or a 5th, and you could bring it down and say, all right, so yes, food is going to go to facilities, and I'm going to have 3 people, food booths, cooking equipment, and eating areas. So I'm going to assign all those to different people in different parts. Once I've done that, I can start looking at this idea of sequencing activities. If you have taken production operations management, this is going to start looking like that network diagramming you guys did. Again, it's that idea of taking things in a specific order. There are things we know that we can do all at the same time. So these are called concurrent or parallel operations. But other things are dependent on them. So we're going to talk about dependencies. So if I go back to my shower episode. So my ability to soap up is dependent upon putting the soap in the shower. My ability to put on clothes is dependent on getting them out first. So that's what we talk about when we say a dependency. In this case, I can't mail the questionnaire until we print the questionnaire. So some of these are kind of like, oh, duh. I would have never thought of that, but now I see why we're breaking it down. And so these network diagrams then, these network diagrams are going to lead to some other things we're going to talk about called a critical path, and we're going to be able to schedule this project and find out exactly how long that project's going to take. So in this case, we have some slack. So we're going to work with these and show you how we create a chart like this. Early start, early finish, late finish, and different models to try to estimate a project. So here, the slack numbers tell us how much between the previous task and the next task it is. We can use these to create what we call a critical path, or in other words, how long the project is probably going to take. With those activities, then, we can also create a budget that's fairly accurate, we hope. And then we can start to perform this task, and we can start to look at it. So to keep me from talking that much,